about the kind of state of uh, transgender issues or debate in this country at the moment. I do feel like that there is a growing almost campaign in the media at the moment to try and re-establish trans people as other. So I do think that even just this once innocuous concept of being like, oh, you can live your life in the way that makes you happy, it's being framed in a way now in the media that suggests that just the action of doing that is detrimental to other groups of people. For example, you know, cisgendered women or children. You know, the media is very much like, well, certain portions of the media are very much encouraging that sort of dialogue. So so even something that sounds quite innocuous is like, yeah, everyone should be able to live their life without hurting anybody. I feel like the backlash of that now is like, oh no, but actually you are hurting people by living your life in the way that
everything's being framed as we're taking up too much space and we're taking space away from cis women. I think it's interesting that Dan noted in his introduction about for the first time on the 2021 census, we're going to have a question about gender. And the way that has now been framed by the media is that we are taking sex off the census and we're no longer asking about biological sex, we're only asking about self-ID gender. But in actual fact, we've never asked about biological sex before. That's never been on the census, but the media have framed it in a way that trans people have taken up too much space, that now we're trying to erase sex completely, which is just bullshit, to be honest.
Yeah, only I'm doing that. That's just me.
Yeah, that's our own personal campaign.
Because I think, just from my own perspective, that mainstream media does that across the board, and it's almost and not taken away from the overall topic matter, but it's almost like an objective of mainstream media to sensationalize, to push an agenda, etc. And so you now bringing forward your points from your own perspective, I think is key in making everybody here on this kind of in this session understand kind of it from your own perspective. I'm sure they've got it from their perspectives, but seeing it from a transgender perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I really appreciate you having us here to do that.
Totally.
You know, it's always good to be given the opportunity to give your
panels
own
like this are so important because in 2020 there were, I think it's 321 articles in the mainstream media by cis people about trans issues, and there was 0 by trans people.
Tabby coming 0. In with the stats there. I love it.
I went on Instagram and did my research. I looked at an infographic.
Who is actually talking about you? Who's that voice? And actually, it needs to be, in certain instances, the right voice at the right time with the genuine and factual information. So I understand that absolutely.
The disability community a few years ago coined the phrase "nothing about us without us," which has then since been adopted by other causes and other people. I think it's a really useful sentence to think about whenever you're creating things. If you're creating a campaign that's aimed towards trans people, have trans people help that campaign. Like some of the most successful like graphic designers in the world are trans. You've got people like Kate Moros, who does like incredible ad campaigns, but then also does like the Spice Girls set design, and like they're a non-binary icon and really cool, and you can get them involved in other people. And it just, if you get people involved from day one of the idea, then you don't fall into making mistakes further down the line that then you have to apologize for or look inauthentic for.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to come on to elements of
sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
No. I'm just kind of making sure everybody knows that we're going to come on to elements of the challenges of being transgender in advertising, because I think whilst you guys you folks you folks won't be actually, in advertising, you're going to have a very good view of what it's like in terms of having advertising aimed at you. So the next question I want to come into, and this is really still about introducing yourselves. When was the first time you affirmed your identity publicly? And how did it make you feel? And you can go as deep or not as you want to be. It could be a one-word answer. It could be, you let me know kind of how you want to tackle that question. Tabby, I'll go to you first because I went to Jen first the last time.
Of course. So for me, it's been, like I said, it's been a bit of a slow trickle. And I define as non-binary trans femme, and there are lots of different facets to my gender identity, and my gender changes and grows and develops as I do. So the first time I sort of publicly acknowledged anything was literally just changing my bio in Twitter and then not mentioning it. So I changed my bio to include they, them as my pronouns, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And that was nice. It was chill. I didn't really do much else. And then I would sort of slowly start to correct people on pronoun usage and on how they were talking to me and stuff. And then it was only last year, actually, that I first referred to myself publicly as a trans woman. And like I said, I'm non-binary trans femme, but I do also count myself as a trans woman and all of the things that come with that as well. And that was only last year, and that was actually in response to being turned away from a venue for looking too visibly queer. I was turned away from a venue in Manchester when I was up there for some work, and then they wouldn't let me or my friends in because we all looked too queer. And it turned out they'd turned away another trans woman earlier that day as well, who she had like 100,000 followers or something stupid. So we then made a bit of a fuss in the Manchester Evening News. But it was a weird moment for that to be the first time that I've sort of been like, oh, I'm using she pronouns now as well. And oh, this is something that really affirms me. And it sort of came out of a moment of anger, just being like, for fuck's sake, this is how we're used to be treated. And this is how we understand that we are always going to be treated. And on my Twitter feed, I talk a lot about the microaggressions and the macroaggressions that I experience quite often in the street, and the most common place for me personally is just waiting for the bus, because I think it's somewhere where you're captive, you're stood still, waiting for something. You sort of can't necessarily, well, you can leave, but you don't want to, and there's no CCTV cameras and there's no staff there. So bus stops are where I sort of, that's what I talk about a lot on Twitter and stuff. So what I've tried to focus on, like I said earlier in my work now, is trans joy and queer joy, and to counteract while still sharing the negatives that I experience, because I think it's really important for cis people to understand that. But I also want to show the joy that I get from being trans, and the joy that I find in community, and the gender euphoria that I experience from certain different things, whether it's trying on a new dress or just painting my nails, or I got amazing gender euphoria when I put a fringe in for the first time over the pandemic, and that was great. And I think it's really important to share with everyone that being trans isn't about trauma, because I think the only narratives that we see, especially in the media, are either statistics of trans people, specifically trans women of color, being murdered, or like drastic coming out stories where it's just a before and an after narrative, where then usually a partner leaves you or something like that. So I'm trying to spread more awareness and understanding of the joys and the power in being trans as well.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Jen, can I put that question to you? Do you need me to repeat it, or are you?
No, sure. I think I can remember. It was about like affirming and coming out and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I came out, I mean, so the term come out like is something that I don't usually say a lot, but I did do it. Like I sat down with my family and did the whole thing, and that was about 10 years ago. It was when I was at university. I was in my second year of uni, and that's when I first started, presenting, a lot of these old-fashioned kind of words and stuff. Like I feel like nowadays it's a lot, there's like more of a language for it. You can there's more words to describe those feelings, but at the time I was pretty much like following the more like medicalized route, you know, like because that's all I knew really what to do. Like I didn't really have anyone around to take first steps from, particularly in Southeast London. Like I just felt like I was the only trans person around, which I know isn't true, but I didn't know any others. Like at the time, like my sort of role models on TV were like Nadia Almada from Big Brother, which is a great role model actually. And
love Nadia so much.
Yeah. And there's something about Miriam, which is like something that I talk about quite a lot because I find it really interesting, but a lot of people don't remember it. But it was a like a dating game show where some guys had to like fight for the affections of a supermodel, and then the twist is that, you know, she's a man sort of thing. That was the twist of it. But anyway, yeah, so it was about 10 years ago. It was in Lewisham and Greenwich area, and that's just when I started going to gender clinic at Charing Cross and following all the steps, doing what they told me, you know, jumping through the hoops and stuff. And for me, it's been like a very long journey as well, you know, like over the 10-year period, I've seen myself gain a level of confidence that like I just never would have imagined. Like if you'd have met me back then, like 10 years ago, you would have thought like, oh my God, like who is this weenie? But now, like I'm a force of nature. So but yeah, in terms of affirming stuff, for me, it's always been more about sort of gaining the. So I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing, but it's always been a combination of gaining sort of like my subjective feelings of reactions from other people, right? Like when society is treating me in a way that I want to have them treat me, that is very affirming to me personally.
This leads really quite nicely on to the next question, and also is a springboard from a stand-up comedy piece that I saw you do, Jen, about being transgender in the workplace. So you must.
Oh, yeah.
You must know what I'm talking about. So
yeah.
The next question I have is, this is a really long question. I'm going to read it out as it is, but it gets to a very short point. So Stonewall's 2018 transgender reports that 51% of transgender people have hidden their identity at work. With that in mind, how can companies be better at creating more inclusive environments for transgender people to feel more comfortable at displaying their transgender identity? Now, Jen, I am going to go to you first. I don't know if you want to do a little preamble into that sketch. It wasn't a sketch speech, it was a stand-up sort of section that you did. And
sure.
How, that leads to being transgender in the workplace, or how that can kind of evolve.
Okay. I think the joke that you might be talking about is one that I make about, so the fact that when I won't do the joke, or maybe I will. I don't. When I started my most recent job, which is an office job, it's like the first sort of office job I've ever had, and they're very good. You know, like the joke is about how they have not mentioned me being trans at all, and I don't know if that's because they don't know or if it's because they're just being polite. But then I go on to say, you know, if it goes on for much longer, I'm going to have to take some maternity leave. That's basically the joke. But the point, you can laugh if you want, it's fine.
You only hear me because I'm.
but the point of it is just about how is it necessarily good to have it out in the open, or like it's addressed all the time, or is it good to like go through your work experience without anybody knowing? And I guess it really just depends on your individual preferences. For me, you know, I've had a lot of different jobs over the years and I've had varying different experiences. I've only worked, you know, post transition. Like I never had a job before that, so I haven't had to deal with the struggle of, you know, coming out at work and all of the things that entails. But I've had varying different experiences. You know, I've certainly been turned away from jobs. Well, probably maybe because I'm unqualified, but also I feel like because, you know, you can get a vibe in an interview, you know, when people are trying to figure you out you know, try and you get misgendered and you get all those other things that come along with the journey. But equally, I've had jobs that have been absolutely brilliant about it. Ultimately, I just think it would be better if all jobs had, not just in their policies, but like a more upfront inclusion strategy in regards to the interview process, or just outlining that they do, you know, somewhat educate their staff in regards to the existence of trans people, you know, because sometimes people do literally need to be told, because sometimes I have to remember that everyday Joe Public isn't quite as in the world as I am, you know, of trans issues and stuff. So it would be nice if it was just a little bit more upfront. I think you'd certainly get a lot more trans people applying for certain jobs if there was an upfront thing that said, you know, we are accepting trans people, we are a trans inclusive workspace, we have trans people in our job. Like, so for example, the job that I have now, my day job sort of thing, I always get worried before I apply for a job, because I always assume that, you know, I'm going to be the only trans person there. It's going to come up in the interview, like things like this. Are they going to know? Aren't they going to know? But then by the time I got the job, I was like, oh, there are actually other trans people that work here. And I was like, wow, it's nice not to be the only one and have that sort of burden, you know.
And you know, work should be a safe place as everywhere else is.
Yeah, exactly.
Tabby, I'm gonna ask you. You may well have, well, you will have different experiences to Jen. As a writer, I wonder if you've been more freelance. Has that kind of had an impact? Kind of just maybe your own experiences within the workplace.
Yeah, totally. So I'm freelance now, and I've been freelance for the past 2 years. But I had an office job before that as well, and I had a very transphobic manager there who would constantly misgender me on purpose and stuff, which was really fun. But I think, like Jen says, it's really important that trans people, it's the same with any minority group. If you see trans people working somewhere, then you feel like you can be there. If you're a person of color and you see other people of color working there, then you're going to feel like, oh, maybe I could work there as well. It's about being able to see yourself in the world that job is, and it's really important. And I think explicitly stating that you're trans inclusive is really important. And I also think one of the things that I used to do at my day job, so I worked in marketing and PR for an opera company, and everyone would always complain that the people that applied for the jobs were all like upper middle class white people. And then I'd be like, well, where are you advertising your jobs? And I'm like, oh, we advertise on Guardian Jobs. And that was it. That was the only place they advertised. So of course they were only getting white middle class people. If you've got to diversify where you're advertising in order to get more diverse people coming into the industry as well, and you've got to be, the thing that I always try to advise people on is, don't be afraid to ask questions. I would much rather you asked a question that was slightly offensive than you were just constantly offensive for like years because you never checked with me. I'd rather you say to me, oh, what bathroom do you use, than just assume that I'm not going to go to the bathroom. Like things like that. So I'll demonstrate by talking about a job that I had a couple of years ago. I did a advert for Vodafone Pride, which was all about being queer in the workplace. And it was all about being like what people can do to be better allies to queer people in the workplace. And we were told to like wear our own clothes, do our own thing, get in there, and then we'll just be asked some questions and do some tasks. But when I got there, it was an entirely cis white team. And they told me that I'd dressed too queer. So I had to get changed. I hadn't bought a change of clothes with me because they hadn't told me to. So I then had to swap clothes with a cis male runner. And then when I asked where to get changed, they said, oh, well, we've only got male and female changing rooms and you're non-binary. So I guess out here, and then had to get changed in front of them all as well. And it was just like, this is meant to be on like inclusion in the workplace. And this is my workplace. And you have not considered any ways to include me or keep me safe. And it was an eye-opening experience for me, because it was very early on in my like doing telly bits or doing adverts and stuff, and I just didn't have the guts to say anything. I think now I would kick up a fuss and be like, bitch, please, do you really think I'm going to do that? No, you're going to give me a budget. I'm going to go to Topshop and I'm going to get myself a cute new dress. Well, not Topshop anymore, RIP. But it's, if they'd have said in advance, like, oh, you can wear your own clothes, but we want, the reason they gave me for like me looking too queer is that they wanted to be able to use the advert to promote inclusion in more conservative countries, which makes sense. And I completely understand that. But ask the questions of me in advance. Ask me what clothes I have. Ask me what I can wear. Ask me what bathrooms I'm going to use. And make sure that when you're casting someone you know as non-binary, have a gender neutral bathroom as well. Just prepare all of that stuff in advance. And you can ask me, or you can ask my agent, or you can, like, preferably pay a trans person to be part of your team from the beginning, and you don't have to ask those questions at all, because it will be covered and you will have paid part of the community to cover that already.
Absolutely. It's as you retold that story, I recoiled in so many ways, and actually you kind of admonished yourself in saying that you didn't say anything. But I sometimes think when you're faced with those very, very ridiculous situations, you almost don't know how to react. And
yeah,
as long as
totally.
you don't let it happen again, I think that's where you're not letting yourself down. If you continue to let things like that happen, so please don't be hard on yourself, I think is what I was trying to say in my very, counselling way. And I think the second thing is you said it was quite a while ago, and it was one of your first forays into the world of kind of TV advertising, etc.
Yeah.
I would like to think, and Jen, could you also come in here, that would not happen now. Like, that wouldn't happen now. And I could be wrong. This could be my naivety. So, Tabby, that wouldn't happen now? I mean, I'm saying it naively.
I don't know. I would like to think so, and it hasn't happened since. So, like I said at the beginning, I've just done a GoDaddy advert, and they were great. They were really inclusive and lovely, and they asked my agent all of the right questions in advance. They asked like what I wanted to wear, like whether I'd be comfortable wearing trousers, or if they should only put me in like a dress or skirt. They asked what name I wanted for my like character, because it was when I'm shown, it's like a social media profile, and they asked like what name I would prefer to have underneath and things like that. So they were really inclusive. And what I found really interesting about that is that the role wasn't a specific trans role either. It was just I think it was described as like interesting looking woman. And so they weren't specifically looking for a trans person, but then they liked my performance, so I got the job, and then they did the extra work. So I don't think they had specifically trans people on the team from the beginning, because it wasn't specifically targeted towards trans people. But because of that, they went the extra mile, and they checked in, and they were really good with my agent the whole time.
Yeah, and just to second that, I've had a similar experience in terms of, like when my agent sends me stuff, nowadays there is usually like there's more attention dedicated to, making sure your pronouns and making sure you're comfortable and all those kind of things. But I do still think it must still happen. It's one of those things, like with the current climate, that I can't imagine that it doesn't. But at the same time, I think people are a lot more sensitive to that now.
Yeah, hopefully less and less so. I'm going to move on to a few questions about trans people in advertising. And maybe you kind of, not in maybe a good way or bad way. The question is, how can brands do better at representing transgender people in advertising? Sorry, tripping over my words. I'll go to Tabby first, actually, and then to you, Jen.
I think it's, like I said, it's engaging with the community in meaningful and paid ways. It's ensuring that trans people get paid for the emotional labor of talking about our experiences, because that can be traumatic, especially when we're recounting things that like have gone wrong or haven't gone well. That can be emotionally taxing. And in the same way that when you're paying someone who's an expert in whatever you're selling to come in and talk about your audience, you're not just paying for the time that we are in the room with you, you're paying for the lived experience that we've had over the last 10 years that have developed the skills that we now have, which is understanding our community and understanding how to talk to businesses about our community. And I think it's really important to engage meaningfully with that. And I think another thing that's really important is that it's not just tokenistic. Don't just shove one trans person at the front, put a rainbow flag behind, and consider that done. It's engaging with charities like Gendered Intelligence, or like Starbucks did with their Mermaids campaign. Like that was a really nice campaign, I thought, that showed a moment of gender euphoria, of getting your new name for the first time or trying out a new name at Starbucks, which so many of us have done. Like I did that when I was trying out Tabby for size. I went and got a coffee and got it written on the side of the cup. And it's a bit of a like funny cliche within trans communities, but the rest of the world didn't know that. And that advert was so lovely. But then it was backed up with, in the UK, the mermaid cookies that Starbucks still sell, which go towards mermaids charity, but also in the US, the health insurance that Starbucks employees get covers gender affirmation surgery, which so many corporate insurances don't. I mean, so many health insurances in general don't, but when it's especially like an hourly rate sort of customer service role, they were one of the first companies to do that. And I think if you're gonna show everything and have it up front and have trans people in your campaigns or whatever, you need to make sure that you are supporting the trans people within your company as much as you can as well. So as much as Starbucks don't pay tax, so therefore not going to advocate we go to them all the time. I think the way that they treat their trans employees in the States, at least, is something that we should all aspire towards.
That is, do you know what, Tabby, not only are you a great writer, performer, and advocate, you're also a bit of a mind reader, because my next question was going to be brands that do it well. So now you've said all of that, yeah, I'm going to ask you the same question. So how can brands do better at representing transgender people, but also maybe a company that you think has done that well? So over to you, Jen.
Yeah, okay. So, well, one of the things that I massively agree with Tabby on is, well, all of it, but one of the main things is that it's the comment about tokenism for me. As somebody who watches, well, not religiously, but I watch adverts. I am a member of the public, and I'm sure adverts affect me. One of the things that is most frustrating to me when I do see trans representation in advertising is tokenism in general. I really dislike the idea, and I understand why it exists, but I really hope that we can move to a point where when we see a trans person on television or represented even just in an advert, that they are not the sole reason for them being there isn't because they're trans. You know, one of the most important messages for me is like, we are members of the public. You know, we have lives, we go about our day in the exact same way that lots of other people go about their day. We're not constantly thinking about being trans all the time, and it doesn't necessarily inform every aspect of our life. Although I also agree, and I think that Starbucks campaign was an example of a good campaign that actually directly relates to trans people specifically. I think that I would still prefer to be at a point where when we see a trans person, it isn't necessarily to do with that. You know, like I want us, my end goal and what I would love to see is I just want us to be a regular mainstay in society. And I do understand that we have our own, we are a market, I suppose we are, but at the same time, I do believe that it's more important that we be shown to be existing as normal people in the world, not just because for example, an example of one that you said, you asked me for an example of one that I didn't think was particularly good, right?
No, an example that was good. So, but if you
was good. Oh, okay, yeah.
But come on, bring that spice, Jen. I want to know now.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
If you've got an example that isn't good, we want to know that as well, genuinely. So maybe
Okay.
balance. What?
Well, none. This isn't. It's not a criticism towards anyone,
No.
like the person who was in the advert or anything like that.
Not at
But I
all.
wasn't a huge fan of. I think it was Co-op. It was the strawberry campaign, where there was like a trans woman, like doing her makeup in the mirror, and sort of just talking about how, talking about affirmating things, and then eating Co-op strawberries, and the implication, it was just a very confusing ad to me. And I think there was a lot of backlash to that ad, and it was unwarranted backlash, it was unfair backlash, but the ad did come across to me as kind of stupid. And I don't like it when trans people are shoehorned into an advert just to be there, and just to sell I see that as an example of taking like a trans story and just associating it with a product.
Yeah.
And I would, I'm not against it in theory. If they'd have done that advert and there'd have been no mention, for example, of the person being trans, because it doesn't actually relate to strawberries in any degree, I don't think. So yeah, that's an example of one that well, not all
I
of
agree.
us, yeah.
No, I totally agree, Jen. That advert I laughed at it because it's so shoehorned in at the end that it's an advert for strawberries. And I talk a lot about just the incidental trans person. Like, I want adverts with, if there's a queue in a shop, I want a trans person in that queue, in the same way that, like, I know we said we don't want tokenism, but in the way that when you're doing a crowd scene, like, I know that from having done extra work and whatever, you have like a second AD looking through and counting, making sure they've got enough Black faces, enough Asian faces, enough people in there to make it representative and diverse enough. And I want people doing that with trans people as well, because we've got to get to the point where we don't need to do that, because it's second nature and you notice when they're not there. In the way that now when I look at a room of all white people, I'm like, oh, that's weird. I don't want that. I don't want to be in there. I want us to be able to do the same with gender diversity and look through and be like, oh, everyone here looks like cis and straight. Maybe we should have a couple of people with nose piercings and colored hair.
I think you're right as well. And I think, like, I mean, I don't know huge amounts about advertising. I've never worked in advertising or anything like that. But one thing that I feel like is a part of advertising, or at least comes across to me, is that, well, advertising certainly has the power to be aspirational, in the sense of, like, yeah, we want adverts to represent and show what society is like, but we also want adverts to be able to represent and show what we would like society to be like. So that's where I go against sort of like the idea of the tokenism element. It's like, yeah, having one or two people in an advert for seemingly no reason feels clumsy. But yeah, I agree with you, like, add more, like show a society in which where we're all getting along and things are nice, because hopefully we can like aspire to that sort of thing.